Thank you all for being here. And thank you to everybody who's worked to put this weekend on. It's been a fantastic time. My name is Holly Sullivan, and I am the president of the Connecticut Citizens Defense League. We are in one of the most deeply blue states in the country. I am pleased to report that we represent more than 41,000 members. I'm only the second president of this organization, with my predecessor having served for 10 years. 2 years ago, when I came into this position, I knew exactly where I wanted to expand. I nominated CCDL member Peter Estrada to fill a new committee position as Urban Engagement Coordinator. Peter was already working to ensure that firearm training was available in our cities in Spanish. He sets up tables at community events like the Puerto Rican Day festivals and offers information on responsible gun ownership for individuals that are members of that community. We sorely needed an increased presence in our cities, particularly as new gun owners are exponentially coming from non-traditional demographics. He has done an amazing job. To preface, Connecticut state statute clearly lays out a detailed structure of how a resident can obtain their permit in our state. The resident submits an application for a temporary permit with their local police department. We have 2 levels of permits. First, you get your temporary permit at the local municipal level, and then within 60 days, you go to the state for a 5-year permit. So the police department has 8 weeks per state statute to issue the to process the application so that the applicant can then go on and get their state permit. It's very clear, maximum of 8 weeks. So on August 31st, CCDL filed a federal lawsuit against the United States, filed a federal civil rights action in the United States District Court against the police chiefs of the cities of Hartford, Bridgeport, New Haven, and Waterbury to stop their blatant and ongoing violations of CCDL members' rights to keep and bear arms. Thank you. CCDL was forced to bring this suit after learning that the cities are unjustifiably delaying law-abiding city residents' applications for municipal firearms permits, the first step in applying for state-issued pistol permits. The CCDL brought this action on behalf of its many members in each of Connecticut's largest cities. CCDL is joined in this action by individual plaintiffs from each city. And I'll tell you a little bit about our plaintiffs. Oral Johnson went to the Hartford Police Department in June to apply for a municipal firearm permit. Oral was directed to put his name on a list and told the Hartford Police Department would call him when he was ready to accept his application. Oral has followed up on numerous occasions since, but Hartford Police Department will still not take his application. Shaquana Williams went to the New Haven Police Department in August to apply for a municipal firearms permit. Her documents were already completed, and she had already paid to have her fingerprints taken. New Haven Police Department refused to take Shaquana's application and instead gave her an appointment in March of 2022 just to submit the application. By then, her fingerprints will be stale, and she will have to pay again for new fingerprinting. Ann Cordero tried to submit her application for a municipal firearms permit to the Bridgeport Police Department. She's tried since last year when this fingerprinting was shut down during the COVID pandemic. In June, Bridgeport Police Department finally instructed her to sign up for an appointment to submit her application. Bridgeport's first available appointment just to submit her application was late January 2022. Jamie Eason managed to submit his application to the Waterbury Police Department in August, at which time he was informed that the Waterbury Police Department will not finish in August, and that he was to expect to come back in 48 weeks, 11 months later. State statute is clear, 8 weeks is the maximum. So in addition to violating the citizens' constitutional right to accessing the permit process, these cities are notorious for violating their residents' constitutional rights by excessively delaying the application process. The CCDL has stood up for the residents in these cities, many of whom are minorities, and fighting for their right to keep and bear arms for personal protection. It's unfathomable that those charged with enforcing our laws would so blatantly violate them by delaying the process to exercise a constitutional right. I'm pleased to say that 2 of the 4 cities that we have filed against have already modified their process and opened up additional appointments. So we're happy to see that. So what I really wanted to talk about today, and I thought this was so interesting, I've kind of revisited what I wanted to say after hearing so many speakers yesterday, and what I really thought was interesting, and especially in chatting with some of the newer folks, is that they weren't really sure if what they were saying was adding value. And I'm so new to this, and I don't know if what I'm saying is right, or if this is the direction that I should be going. So it kind of triggered with me a story that I wanted to tell you about, and I'm going to kind of go off from what I was originally planning to speak about. So many times this weekend we've heard about the amazing foundation that our forefathers prepared for us and the Constitution that they left us. And these men are legends, deservedly so. Their words are etched in stone, their portraits hang in our museums. The reality is that these men were every bit as human as we are. They were prone to the same mistakes that we made. They made some egregious hypocrisies in their philosophy versus their practice, their emotions, their frustrations. It was all very real. They're not any different than the people that we are. They were also trying to navigate uncharted political territory by drawing a line in the sand against a tyrannical government. We know all about that. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm an avid revolutionary history buff. So I'd like to share with you this particular story. So it was June of 1776, and Ben Franklin had just gotten home from a mission to Canada with the future trader Benedict Arnold. And he was in Philadelphia recovering from gout, and he couldn't leave the house yet. So on June 21st, Ben Franklin was 70 years old, and he gets an envelope or a package from Thomas Jefferson. And he opens it up, and inside is a note. And Ben Franklin is 70, Thomas Jefferson is 33. So he's 6 years younger than I am now. So these guys were, a lot of these guys were pretty young. They were doing their very best. So Jefferson enclosed a note that read, "Will Dr. Franklin be so good as to peruse it and suggest such alterations as his more enlarged view of the subject may dictate?" They were very diplomatic. So Franklin opened up this envelope, and enclosed was an original draft of the Declaration of Independence. Franklin only made a couple changes, but the most significant was the following. Jefferson had written, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." And Franklin crossed out sacred and undeniable and wrote in self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You see, Franklin was a scientist, but he had no formal education, whereas Jefferson was a gentleman and arguably a philosopher. Franklin not only discovered the conduction of electricity through lightning, but he discovered that colds were passed from contagion and not from temperature. He figured out that we got cooled off because our sweat evaporated, not because of the breeze. He was just a brilliant man, but he had no real education. Whereas Jefferson had a lot of advantages in life. So they sort of saw things through very different lenses. And Jefferson was humble enough to recognize this and ask for the senior citizens' input. And because of this, the perfect statement was formed that prefaced an absolute conviction for the remainder of the document. Self-evident was not subjective, it was just fact. And if you go on the Library of Congress website, you can actually see an image of the original Declaration of Independence draft, and right through sacred and undeniable is self-evident written in Franklin's penmanship. So check it out, it's pretty cool. So a little over a week later, it's July 2nd, 1776, and the Continental Congress is making their final revisions to the Declaration. They slashed out nearly 5 paragraphs of Jefferson's work, and he was crushed. He'd worked so hard on it, and he was incredibly upset. Jefferson later wrote about that day. He said, quote, "I sat near Dr. Franklin, who perceived that I was not insensitive to these mutilations." He was hurt, right? We know what that's like. You work so hard on something, then somebody edits it or says this isn't right. So Franklin pulled Jefferson aside and told him a story. And I'm going to share the story with you, one, because I think it's fantastic and it shows just how human that they were. So Jefferson's story, the story that Ben Franklin told Jefferson was about when he was a young printer. And Franklin had a friend who was going to open a hat shop. And the friend went to Ben Franklin and said, I need a sign for my hat shop. Will you help me come up with a sign? So Franklin's version of the sign read, John Thompson, hatter, makes and sells hats for ready money, with a picture of a hat. So he decided, instead of just giving it to his friend to just approve, he would send it to a couple other friends to look at first. So this is the story that he told Thomas Jefferson. His first friend that he showed it to thought that the word hatter was repetitive because it was followed by the words makes hats, which showed that he was already a hatter. And now I'm going into Ben Franklin's own words. So it was struck out. The next observed that the word makes might as well be omitted because his customers would not care who made the hat. So that was struck out. A third thought that the words for ready money was useless because it was not the custom of the place to sell them on credit. So that was removed. Then so everyone who purchased expected to pay. So they thought that that could be removed. So now the inscription read, John Thompson sells hats. Went to one last person for a revision, and the person said, sells hats? Well, nobody would expect you to give them away. Then what is the use of that word? So it was struck out. And when everything was finally struck out, the remainder of what was left, it was reduced to John Thompson with a picture of a hat. And that was the story that Benjamin Franklin told Thomas Jefferson, is that I started with all of these words, and by the time everybody revised it, it was just the man's name with a picture of a hat. And I think that that really goes to show that we come in with kind of these ideas of all that we want to say and what we think, and if we go to other people and hear their input and look for that level of mentorship, you might walk away and go, well, maybe that was a little bit more effective. So what he was saying is that essentially, well, we think we have the answer. Everyone has a contribution to be added from their own perspective. So to also keep it in perspective, these men came from tremendously different backgrounds, and this is very important and relative still today. Franklin grew up a scrappy kid from the streets of Boston. He had 16 siblings. He later ran away to Philadelphia and after his family could not afford tuition in a ministry school. Whereas Jefferson grew up on a Virginia plantation, started his formal education at the age of 9, and would go on to law school. However, this simple gesture of simply respecting one another's opinions, soliciting them, accepting them, and then more importantly, showing some empathy for others, even with a little bit of humor, like the hat story. Whether or not it's true, we'll never know, because that was Ben Franklin's style. So what I really want to stress is that when we talked about being vigilant, vigilant does not mean just watching what the government is doing. Vigilance means having a pulse on the greater community. Vigilance is being in touch with how things are changing. Vigilance means speaking up for all who wish to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And vigilance is not just holding others accountable, but also holding ourselves accountable. So we need to be good to people. We need to be good to the new members of the Second Amendment community. We need to be in touch with where they're coming from and what their experience is, because as much as we can speak to one another, we're in our own echo chamber. And then we're truly not learning about what the future of the Second Amendment community is going to be. So we need to be committed to not only working on our issues, but to also be committed to working on developing the people that are coming after us. So get out there and tell your stories and take the time to hear the stories of those who may even be twice your age or come from a different background or may not have the same education. And if we do these things, we will not just remain in our own echo chamber, and the difference that it makes could be self-evident. So thank you.